They had been living inside an ordinary silence on Kepler 442b for 3 months, not the heroic silence of a monument, but the small, mechanical quiet of people doing their jobs. Drill heads spun. Conveyor belts whispered. Miners tracked or yields on cracked tablet screens. Then, without warning, the sky turned into architecture. From the command center, Commander Jake Morrison watched polished hulls fall through the upper atmosphere like sculptures. The ships were wrong for war, they were beautiful. Curved lines, finished metal that took the twin suns and turned them into a light show. They moved with an aesthetic that human engineering rarely prioritized. It unsettled him. The distress ping cut the coffee steam and the light show cleanly. Broken English, terrified rhythm, please help us. Strange ships landed near Southern Complex. They have weapons. They are taking our people. Jake set the cup down and walked to the communications console. Lieutenant Amy Carter was already dragging tactical overlays across the display: colony plan, processing plants, the worker housing dispersed across 50 square kilometers of Basalt Valley. The voice said 12 large ships and maybe 20 smaller craft. Hundreds on the ground. How many troops? Jake asked. In the rain of data, Amy's satellite feed stitched a picture: soldiers in organized formations, gleaming armor, staffs that read like religious regalia and like weapons at once. The Zephyrian Force, and I use that name because names matter, the Zephyrians brought a doctrine to war as much as they brought armor, were building a perimeter and separating civilians into groups. No casualties yet, but prisoners. Jake set the base on full alert, all units to combat readiness. We have a hostile alien force on Kepler 442b. There was no practice for the particular flavor of fear that arrives when you realize the geography you know is suddenly contested. Sergeant Pete Johnson was in the armory, methodical, pulling gear like a man dressing for a ceremony he hoped would be brief. Within 10 minutes 37 humans were sealed into transport hulls and moving. The Zephyrians had expected a quiet mission: salvage claims, submission, an easy transfer of mineral rights. Their intelligence labeled the colony as low value, a primitive extraction outpost. Commander Velketh had brought 400 trained soldiers to secure what should have been an administrative handover. The plan was simple: land, intimidate, file the documents. Jake watched the tactical picture as the transports closed. The alien checkpoints were textbook siege positions: strong fields of fire, heavy armor in shallow echelon, a posture built for taking ground and holding population centers. But their formations were old codified maneuver, ceremonial in their precision. Their weapons were energy projectors, effective at certain ranges but blunt instruments against a flexible opponent. Their armor was layered and heavy. They moved like a species that valued process over improvisation. Amy, patch me to whoever's commanding them, Jake said. A voice answered in accented English, the formal cadence of a professional. This is Commander Velketh of the Zephyrian Imperial Guard. Identify yourself. Commander Morrison. You are attacking civilians under our protection. Withdraw within 30 minutes or face removal. Jake's tone was slow, meant to be heard all the way through. Velketh laughed over the line. Humans, we have no record of your species claiming territory here. These mining rights are ancient law. Cooperate and you will not be harmed. Jake let the coffee cool in his cup and counted to 3. Those are human colonists. 30 minutes. He cut the connection, because sometimes orders are more truthful when they are the last words before action. From the observation post, Pete studied the Zephyrian disposition through binoculars. They were spread thin, controlling intersections and important structures, deployed for long-term siege and population control rather than rapid engagement. Not expecting a quick, violent fight, Pete said. They're organized for occupation. Amy's voice came through crisp: we have air support in 20. Artillery in 15. Naval units standing by for orbital if needed. The human response began to assemble, not as a spectacle but as an inevitability. The Planetary Defense Corps and the combined armies that backed them moved with a habit born of doctrine and repetition: combined arms, coordinated fire support, electronic countermeasures. In the Human Handbook, this was standard. On Kepler 442b, it would look like a revelation. The Zephyrian doctrine prized honor and formal engagements. They fought declared battles, not the sudden, integrated choreography the humans brought: indirect fire, air-ground coordination, surgical strikes on command nodes. When the first artillery rounds arrived, they were invisible and precise, targeting command hubs and sniffing out communication arrays. Chaos unfolded in manufactured silence. Their carefully ordered defense collapsed into confusion because the attack came from places their rules hadn't prepared them to expect. Pete's infantry moved under the curtain of that artillery. Small units, fluid motion, radioed coordination, human hallmarks. The air support screamed overhead and made new geometry of flame where metal had been. Ships that had been ornaments during the landing were rapidly becoming wreckage. Within 2 hours the Zephyrian operation had unraveled. When the shooting stopped, Jake walked among the alien positions with the deliberate detachment of a man trained to separate action from meaning. Survivors were triaged, treated under prisoner-of-war protocols. The colonists, shaken and close to disbelief, began to organize again. The mining operation resumed with the quickness of people determined not to let the day's violence define the week. Kepler 442b folded the action into its routine. Whatever had happened, it arrived with force, with aesthetic ships and ancient laws and a doctrine that could not answer for indirect, scalable violence. The colonists called it a defense. The Zephyrians called it catastrophe. For the first time on Kepler 442b, the rest of the galaxy started to take notes. If you're finding this tense, tell me in the comments, would you have stayed on Kepler 442b? And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe. We unpack these moments slowly, because the thinking matters as much as the action. 3 days later the Council's investigator arrived expecting ruin. Council Ambassador Velter had braced for charred landscape, clear signatures of orbital bombardment, and the kind of ruin that told stories in cratered silence. Instead she found miners at lunch, conveyors humming, and a colony that had glued itself into normalcy as if an extraordinary day could be made ordinary again. Captain Rick Santos met her at the pad with a cup of coffee and a quiet manner. He looked like someone who managed logistics and people more than parades. "Welcome to Kepler Station," he said. "We don't get many visitors. It's an honor." Velter walked the colony with her eyes open for battle damage and found only a cleared lot near the southern edge where workers were already smoothing fill and sweeping debris. Minimal damage. Minimal disruption. Minimal panic. The discrepancy between Zephyrian reports and Kepler's reality was stark. The Zephyrians had told stories of demonic coordination, fire from unseen sources, and tactical doctrines that violated their concepts of war. Their intelligence had made the engagement look apocalyptic. The Council, cautious by nature, had sent a team to separate narrative hysteria from evidence. Dr. Lisa Monroe produced casualty reports that read like an impossible calculation. 37 human soldiers had engaged 400 Zephyrian troops. 2 humans with minor wounds. Over 300 Zephyrians dead or incapacitated. Ambassador Velter's military training told her the ratios were implausible. Yet the tactical logs made a pattern: combined arms, real-time intelligence from satellites, precision strikes, coordinated air and artillery, human things described by their own soldiers as standard procedure. Rick activated a holograph and showed the engagement. The Zephyrians had deployed for siege, static positions, central command nodes, predictable patrols. In response, the humans applied what their doctrine called combined arms, artillery interdiction, close air support, electronic countermeasures, and orchestration from satellite feeds. The effect was surgical: target command and communications first, then fracture cohesion. The enemy collapsed into a disordered scattering. Sergeant Pete Johnson, who had been in the thick of it, described the action without drama. "We did what we trained to do," he said. Fire and movement. Call the air. Use cover. Take the initiative. For Pete and his men, the fight was rote because their lives had been arranged around the assumption they might be needed. For the Zephyrians, it was a demonstration of techniques they lacked the cultural and technical imagination to handle. Ambassador Velter kept circling that word, imagination. The Council had long assumed that wars proceeded in finite, civilized patterns. Many Council species had never integrated orbital assets with fast tactical responses. The human idea of weaving ground units, orbital recon, and guided munitions into an almost instantaneous puzzle was foreign. Captain Santos refused to portray the operation as an act of genius. "It's training," he said. "It's doctrine. We practice command and control until it becomes reflex." The implications troubled the Council investigators. If a militia, the Planetary Defense Corps, a force of part-time soldiers who still punched timecards in peacetime, could conduct combined arms at that level, what then of humanity's professional forces? The question moved from tactical curiosity to strategic alarm. Ambassador Velter wrote her report, and the ripples reached the Galactic Council in a matter of weeks. On Nexus Prime, in the Council's glass chamber, the analysis translated into political noise. War leader Krexthal's voice filled the room with the kind of certainty that tries to convert anxiety into action. "This species violates our assumptions," he said. "They must be contained." Others urged restraint. The human action at Kepler 442b had been defensive, proportionate, and had minimized civilian harm. The debate bifurcated between fear and the possibility of diplomatic accommodation. The Council voted for a demonstration meant to reassert the old order, Operation Overwhelming Demonstration. 50 warships, a show of arms meant to coerce submission before humanity could grow into a threat. Command was given, fleets assembled, and the Council arranged to drop into the outskirts of human-held space. They expected compliance through spectacle. On the UHS Defender, Admiral Ben Parker watched these ships arrive like relics of doctrine. He read the messages in the usual formal cadence: kneel to Council authority or be taught your place. Ben answered in an ordinary, dry voice. "I'm not the person to surrender human space," he said. He sounded amused. His tactical officer, Colonel Tracy Williams, studied the Council fleet and observed something that made her roll the corners of her mouth inward: the ships moved like museum pieces. Fusion drives that humans considered outmoded, weapon projectors of limited range, predictable formations without the point defense and electronic warfare that modern human fleets treated as baseline. To Tracy, they were antique, well-crafted, ceremonial, but constrained by old doctrine. When the Council opened fire in their demonstration, 3 human frigates, Ranger, Guardian, Sentinel, responded with a minimal force demonstration. They were patrol craft by human standards, small and crude for routine duties. The Council fleet unleashed a bright, textbook barrage. The human frigates were not where the weapons arrived. They had moved at accelerations that the Council's gunners could not track. They danced between beams and closed the distance like predators. They struck command nodes first, then point defense, then left the fleet drifting. Within 2 hours, 50 warships had been disabled without wholesale slaughter. The human ships had not been technologically superior in exotic ways. They used fusion drives, defensive suites, and weapons humanity had already built and known how to maintain. The advantage came from doctrine, training, and integrated thinking, the human quality of making different systems sing together in a way that multiplied effect. Council Intelligence Director Zixmal did what intelligence people do when the world surprises them: he read history. What he found in human archives was not a single technological secret. It was a civilization shaped by 6,000 years of organized conflict, an institutional culture that expected war as a fixture of life and organized society on the assumption of mobilization. Every human adult carried some military preparation. Civil infrastructure had been designed to convert to production in wartime. Combined arms coordination was not innovation for them, it was civilization. The data reoriented the Council's fear. It was not that humans possessed a secret weapon. It was that their entire approach to warfare, their doctrine, training, reserve mobilization, and distributed industrial base, created a species that could scale force quickly and with surgical intent. From Kepler 442b to the Council's edge, human action looked less like surprise and more like design. At the tactical level, the lesson was precise: combined arms and real-time orbital integration can defeat numerically superior forces that depend on rigid doctrine. At the cultural level, the lesson was deeper: humans had organized for perpetual preparedness. For the Council, this meant recalibration. For humanity, it meant a negotiation not simply of arms but of assumption, the assumption that the galaxy could rely on rules the humans were not bound to follow. If you want a deep dive into human doctrine and combined arms, drop a line below. What part of the human approach would you want to teach another species first? And remember to subscribe if you like slow, thinking first military sci-fi. 3 weeks after the Kepler incident, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The chamber was an amphitheater of faces and carapaces, of ritual staffs and knitted brows. Director Zixmal presented a dossier that should have read like a technical brief, but the words carried the weight of existential reassessment. The human species, his analysis said, was not simply a maritime or planetary polity that had grown spacefaring. Humanity had become, by doctrine and design, a civilization prepared to treat total war as a normal strategic option. Panic and prudence debated for hours. Some delegates asked for diplomacy. Others, fearful, seeing the raw tactical footage from Kepler and the Council fleet encounter, argued containment. The question was not just capability, it was identity. What is the character of a species that trains its civilians for combat and organizes industry for rapid wartime conversion? What kind of peace can exist with a polity whose baseline assumption is that conflict is inevitable? The vote landed on caution, a show of force in the hope of a predictable response. That decision brought Craigthal and 50 warships. It brought tactical postures that had dominated interstellar politics for generations. It also brought Admiral Ben Parker and 3 human frigates. What followed was not the annihilation the Council had expected but the collapse of assumptions. Precision strikes, point defense suppression, and an integrated doctrine turned a demonstration into humiliation. The Council ships were disabled, not annihilated. Humanity preserved life where it could, a detail that would shape the calculus that followed. When Director Zixmal dug through archives, the explanation did not lie in a secret propulsion system or a weapon of unprecedented yield. It lay in continuity, 6,000 years of human history in which preparation for war had been normalized. Basic military training existed in civics curricula. The Planetary Defense Corps, militia organized from the civilian population, could be converted into operational units in days. The regular army was layered with specializations, logistics nodes, and command structures designed for long, gritty conflict. Special forces, trained for surgical, independent operations, were the apex of that architecture. Zixmal sought more than blueprints. He sought narrative. Why would a species organize itself in this way? Major Sam Turner, a human military historian at the embassy, provided a kind of confession framed as explanation. "We learned peace is fragile," Sam said. "Unprepared civilizations disappear. We'd rather be prepared for threats that never come than be surprised by ones that do." The Council had to decide what to do with knowledge that could be weaponized or that might simply be a fact of human polity. The options were stark: attempt coercion and risk extinction, or extend an invitation to integrate, to accept humanity into the Council with eyes wide open about its capabilities. Director Zixmal recommended coexistence. The alternative was bluff against a species that thought in decades of mobilization, not in diplomatic posturing. So the Council extended an olive branch, a seat at the table, and asked for a partner who would contribute to collective security. It was an acknowledgement not of weakness but of pragmatic self-preservation. General Katie Ross took Earth's seat. She arrived modestly, not in a flotilla but on a single transport, and stepped into the chamber in a military uniform that said competence more than ceremony. She spoke plainly: humanity did not seek conquest, it sought safety, trade, and the freedom to develop. Yet she did not soften doctrine. If our colonies are threatened, she said, cool and unflinching, our response will be overwhelming. If Earth itself is threatened, our doctrine calls for the complete destruction of the aggressor. It read as simple calculus, not a rhetorical flourish. The room breathed, not in relief, but in understanding. This was not posture. It was policy. Concessions followed. Humanity agreed to join the council, to share some technologies and to participate in meetings that would, in time, create norms around the use of surge force and the protection of civilians. In return, the council acknowledged human sovereignty and invited human military expertise into joint exercises. Colonel Danny Brooks's Special Operations Unit was redeployed, not to invade, but to teach. Take it easy on them during training, he told his men as they prepared to work with species who had never experienced organized combat. These species have been living in peace. They don't know what we take for granted. There is an ironical grace in that mandate. The galaxy had always imagined humanity as the unrefined variable, violent, unpredictable. Instead, humans proved terrifying because they combined restraint with the capacity for total war. They had the moral calculus to preserve life and the will to apply overwhelming force when survival demanded it. That combination made them both dangerous and, paradoxically, safe partners, dangerous to any aggressor, useful to any ally.